Welcome back. Today I am making Euro shams out of a pretty floral linen with self welt, and I'm going to make them completely using the Juki regular sewing machine rather than the walking foot machine, just to show you that it's possible. The foot I used today was this little skinny foot on the Juki regular sewing machine rather than this foot that I would have used on the walking foot. This is a welt foot specifically for 1/4 inch welt. This is a floral linen. First pressed on this fusible interfacing to the back just to stabilize the linen. And then we used a 1/4 inch welt. And then we used number 4 nylon zipper here. And so I'll show you how to make the welt, how to attach the zipper, and then how to finish it all up, all on the regular sewing machine. So I hope you enjoy. I'm getting ready to cut some welt out of this fabric for 2 Euro shams. Euro sham means it's 26 to 27 inches square pillow size. And this is the fabric for the pillows and the welts. Whenever you want to have your welt fabric the same as the pillow fabric, that's called self welt. So to get a true bias cut out of a fabric, you want to fold over the corner of the fabric to create a 45-degree angle, which is basically a triangle. And the yellow line on my table indicates a true 45-degree angle. So as long as your selvage is parallel with the side of the table here, the angle of this fold line, once lined up with the yellow line, is going to be a true 45-degree bias cut. So here is our fabric along the selvage right here. And if I tug on it, there's a tiny bit of stretch, but not much. And then here is our new cut line along the bias cut. And if I tug on that, you can see there's quite a bit of stretch. And the reason you want to have some flexibility in your welt is because it will turn the corner of the pillow smoothly without having wrinkles in the fabric. It's not against the rules to cut your welt on the straight grain. You could absolutely do that. And sometimes you would want to do that because the pattern might be more desirable that way. But on the straight grain, you just don't have that much stretch. So now that I have that angle cut, I'm going to turn the fabric so I can reach it and have that angle run up parallel along the side of the table. That way I don't have to reach across the table to make the cut. And then besides that, I'm going to fold it in half so that I don't have to cut a single layer at a time. I can draw my lines and cut through 2 layers at a time. And then also, if I line this up with one of the lines on the table, I can use those lines to line up my ruler and draw a straight edge without measuring my fabric. And in this case, I'm just drawing a 2-inch line, which is the amount of this ruler. But if I was drawing a 5-inch line or a 4-inch line, then I could use these lines on the table. So I'm going to cut these strips and sew them together and then make my welt cord. And then once I have them cut, I'm going to sew 2 pieces together for one pillow and 2 pieces together for the other pillow. Do the math on how much I need to go around a pillow, and then I figure out how many strips I need. So I'll need 2 for each pillow. And then before I open these up and put them aside, I like to keep track of which way is up. It's pretty reversible since it's an overall flower pattern, but more than the top and bottom is the direction of the fabric, which is not going to matter much in this fabric, but it's a good habit to get into to make sure that when you are working with welt, that you sew together the strips in the correct order, which means this is the top of this piece and this is the top of this piece. So what I would not want to do is put the two tops together, because that means one would be upside down from the other. So what I want to do is make sure that I take the top from this piece and put it together with the bottom of this piece. So I'm pointing that out because it's really tempting to take these strips and put them aside until I'm ready to work with them. But before I do that, I want to at least pin together the ends that go together, rather than mixing up which way they go. And my color won't change, which is the reason we have to be so careful. Some fabrics have a nap to them, which means that the shading of this piece to this piece would change if they were put together in the wrong order. I'm going to show you how to sew those together to make a really hidden seam. So here's the selvage, and I'm going to cut that off on the same angle. Instead of cutting straight like this, I'm going to cut along the selvage. That way each piece is going to go together with this angle at the same degree. And then I'm going to flip one over on top of the other so that it's right sides together, right side to right side. This is the part where it might seem like you would just line them up right there and sew your 1/2 inch seam allowance. But if we did that right here and then open it, that's what it would look like. So it's not going to be connected in a straight line. So to get your straight line, you want to overlap these pieces so that the points hang over the actual strips of the welt. And you want to overlap them enough to where you have approximately the size of your seam allowance. So if you're working with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, that's the distance from the edge here to where they intersect. That's going to be our stitch line. And I don't normally draw a line. I'm doing this to show you where to stitch. So where the fabrics overlap and intersect right there to that same place over here, we measure that, that's about a 1/2 inch. So you can see I'm going to pin it to represent a stitch line and then open it so you can see how it will look once it's stitched. If we open that now, it's going to make a straight line and it's going to match right here and right here. There's a partial piece of a flower here and nothing happening here. So if we want to have that pattern blend a little bit more, we can pick a different spot, which is not going to be extremely important because you're only going to see a little line of the seam. But if we at least get some color over here rather than just the solid, then it will blend in very seamlessly. So I like what's happening right here. I'm only going to lose a few inches if I do that. So I'm going to cut on the same angle right here. This part will be thrown away, and then I will line up the edges again here and overlap the points so that the intersection here and here will create about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's a lot better. That way we have some color on either side of the seam. Once we make the welt, all you're going to see is a tiny portion of the seam. And once it's stitched, I will press the seams open on the back. That means I'll press this one this way and this one this way, and it will create less of a bump. And then we'll take these two to the sewing machine and stitch right along that 1/2 inch mark, and then we'll come back and press them open, and then we can make the welt. So here we are at the machine ready to sew the seam of this, connecting these two welt strips together, bias strips. And I typically go over this twice because I like it to be really strong. So the first time is a based stitch, and the second time I'm going to back stitch in the beginning and the end. So back stitch right there, and then back stitch at the end. If it was a really thick fabric, then I would cut down some of this seam allowance, which I still may do. We'll see how it feels. But now I have this one to do, and this one I didn't draw a line, so I'm just going to eyeball an imaginary line from this point to this point, and that's what I look at. Now I'm ready to press that open. So I'll cut off the extra string and the little triangles. And then this is not totally necessary with this fabric, but if it was a thick fabric, I would cut this seam allowance down even further to eliminate the bulk. And so then once the welt is made, when this fabric comes together like this part goes over here and this part goes over here, and by trimming some of that away, it's not as bulky. Now we'll go back to the machine and actually place the welt inside fabric and then stitch right next to it, and that is what creates the welt cord. I'm at the machine ready to make the welt cord out of this 3/8 inch welt. So I'm going to find the end of the welt strip of fabric, place the welt in the middle, and then fold over the raw edges so they meet, and then put that underneath your zipper foot or a special welt foot if you prefer, and then back stitch a little bit, and then just sew that whole strip until you get to the other end of the welt. And I'm going to stretch this fabric a little bit as I'm sewing. That will eliminate any of the puckering that might happen if I didn't. So here's the welt as it's coming out. And as I'm aiming and guiding this fabric right here, instead of keeping it straight in front of the needle, I'm holding it off to this side over here a little bit so that that foot is going to ride up close to the actual welt. If I stayed over here, it might not stitch as close as I want it to, so I keep it at this slight angle on purpose. And I just go every 6 inches or so, reposition every time my finger gets close to the foot. Instead of letting all of this fabric and the welt slide through this hand, I am not letting go, I'm holding on to it. And then I stop sewing when my finger gets close. That way you keep the right amount of tension on the fabric. So here's the seam. Almost to the end here. Back stitch a little bit, and then that's it. So I'm going to take this over to the serger. I like to serge off the raw edge, and then it cuts off any parts that are not totally even. So the serged edge will create a very consistent seam allowance. And then when I go to attach this to the pillow, my stitch line will be very consistent on the edge of the pillow. And I'm just going to guide the welt along the edge of this foot. And that way I'll get a consistent size lip cord right there. Now that I have the welt prepared and the pillow pieces cut and serged, I'm ready to combine the pieces. So I'm going to start with the welt on the bottom right hand corner of the pillow. I always start there because that way where I'm going to match the two ends is going to be the most inconspicuous spot right in that corner. And I don't want to start on the bottom where the zipper goes because that seam that I'm going to be creating would make the zipper a little bit bulky right there. So it's easier to start on the side, and I want to be low on the side rather than up high or in the middle. The pillow is going to sit and be a little bit smushed right there, so you'll never really notice that seam. When I'm sewing this, it's going to be the edges of the welt lined up with the edges of the pillow, and then when I get to the corner, I'm going to clip a little bit of the fabric and then turn the corner, and instead of lining up the edges even, I'm going to line up the edge of the welt with a little bit of this fabric showing so that I can fit the zipper at the bottom. That just means that my seam allowance is going to be bigger where the zipper goes than on the other three edges of the pillow. Also, the pin at the bottom here means that this is the bottom of the pillow piece, which means that's where the zipper goes down here. So here I'm at the bottom right side of the front of the pillow, and I'm going to start sewing the welt 4 inches above, and I'm going to leave a couple inches of the welt loose. So I'm going to start about down here and line up the edges of the welt to the edge of the pillow. About 3/4 of an inch above the bottom of the pillow. This is where the zipper is going to go. Normally I would clip 1/2 inch above, but where the zipper goes, I'm going to clip 3/4 of an inch. And I'm eyeballing that distance. You can measure it with a ruler. And then by clipping it, you can just hold it with your finger on the top and then turn that corner. And then you have a nice sharp angle. And then leave the needle down where you want to pivot and turn all the fabric. And then I'm just going to line up the edge of the welt right along the serging stitch. And that's my mark for 3/4 of an inch. So when I cut the pillows, I cut them a little bit longer to allow for that extra space. And now when I get to this corner, I'm not going to cut a 3/4 inch clip anymore because now I only want to turn it so that I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to clip it at 1/2 inch. And I'm stitching right along where my original stitch line is from making the welt. That way you don't see that stitch line from the front of the pillow. So I'm at the beginning again where I have my loose bit of welt, and so I need to stop when I get closer to them overlapping so I have enough room to work on the connection. And I'm just going to cut the thread and then open up each end of the welt and connect them, and then finish stitching that on. So what I'm going to do is cut away some of the extra fabric here and then open up each end. I'm cutting away this serged edge. You can use a seam ripper, but I'm just going to carefully cut open, stitch. And that was not so pretty, but I know I don't need that part. So now that it's past the double stitching, it'll open up easier. And I definitely will be careful not to cut the fabric. So I want to get the welt exposed where they're going to meet. These welt pieces kind of expand once they're cut, so we don't want them to be too fluffy on the inside. I'm just going to put a little piece of tape around the end, trying to wrap it to the same size that it is on the inside. It only needs to be wrapped where I'm going to cut it. This will all get thrown away. So I can see where they overlap. I'll take a duller pair of scissors since I'm cutting through tape, and then get them laying nice and flat. And then I'm going to cut right through both pieces at the same time. That way I'll be left with a clean edge on each side, and they will perfectly be the right size. I'm going to take 2 pins and mark where the fabric should be stitched together. And I want to do that somewhere here in the middle. So I'll mark that one right there. Overlap this one and try to pin it right at the same place as the other pin. That way, when I turn this around to join them, I just overlap those pins and it'll be magically the right size. So now I have to turn this around. It gets a little messy here, so that's why all the pinning helps. So I'm turning these around so that I get the right sides together. And you have to get all of the welt out of the way, that piece and this piece. And then line up those pins and flatten out as much as possible so that you can get it underneath the foot with the pins lined up. And get the foot right in the spot where the needle will sew over the pins, but I'm going to take them out before I do that. But this way I can see where it needs to go. I'll just put the needle down, and then I'll take out the pins and then stitch. And then back stitch. Here we go. Now that I turned it around, you can see what is going on here. So now I have the fabric stitched together. I'm going to open the seam and just kind of press it flat with my finger, and then get that welt inside so that the seam stays open. And then I'm going to close it up. And you want to try to get everything in there as tight as possible and on the same straight line as the rest. So since I cut away the serging, if you see the serging from the pillow, then you know you're in the right place. So once I get going, I'm going to make sure before I get too far that this welt pushed all the way in. And you can use your scissor or some other pointy object to guide everything and make sure everything is in there. And then we can see how it looks. There we go. That's the seam right there. And I luckily ended up where there's no pattern, so it's just the solid white section. And there's no gap in the stuffing of the welt. So now I can start putting the corners together where the zipper goes. I'll do a little stitch here and on the other end before I put the zipper in. Then I'll show you how I put the zipper in. I've just pinned the bottom two corners of this pillow where I'm going to put the zipper. So this corner and this corner, and then the zipper will go in between there. So first I like to just sew up the corner a little bit. And I do go around the corner just about an inch. So maybe a couple inches on the bottom and then an inch up the side right here. And then I'll do the same to this corner. Once the zipper's in, it's hard for me to get to the corners, so I like to do that first. Okay, so now the corners are stitched, and so you can see if I turn it, that corner is finished. Check the back. A little bit of stitching showing, so I'm going to go a little bit closer right there. That's better. Let me check the other side. Yep, that's good. No stitching showing on either side. So now I can put the zipper in. So here I have the zipper cut off the zipper roll to the length just a little bit shorter than this pillow. I have enough to be about an inch, well, maybe just half an inch shorter on each end. And then what I'm going to do is start on the side of the pillow that does not have the welt. So I'll turn the zipper upside down, facing the right side of the pillow. Have the zipper half an inch in from the end. Place the zipper so that the teeth land in the seam of the pillow. And then start sewing it down. And then sew the rest of the way with the same amount of seam allowance over here. And then when you get close to the slide that under the foot and behind the needle, and then it's out of the way the rest of the way. So you can see I'm leaving the same amount of fabric revealed right here. That gets the zipper in the same spot all the way down the pillow. And then when I get to the end, it gets a little bit tight, but it fits. Just scooch it in there. Now that I have the zipper stitched onto the one side of the pillow, it's time to stitch it onto the side that has the welt. So I'm going to start with the end tucked in as tight as I can get it. And then I want to try to get the teeth so that they are just above the stitch line of the welt. Right there. So basically my guide is the seam allowance of the lip cord. And then because I want the zipper to be stitched as close to the welt as possible, I think I can get closer to the teeth, thereby hiding that stitch line. So I'm going to go over it one more time. It's definitely getting closer. The zipper is up nice and close to the welt. And so the last step for the zipper is I'm going to sew a lip out of this side to cover the zipper. So in order to get that started, I like to turn it around to the right side so I can see it. And then I will pin a couple of pins through the layers so that I can get the lip to the size I want it. Use that as a guide all the way down after I get started. So just a couple will get me started, because in the beginning I won't be able to see what I'm doing. I'm just sewing from the back blindly. But I've pinned it into place, so it should be just right. So I'm going to take those 2 pins out as I get to them. There's the first one, and then there's the second one. And now I should be able to open up the zipper and push that slide back behind the foot again so I can see the rest of it. Now I can see how much fabric is folded over, creating that lip that will hide the zipper. So now I can keep that amount of fabric consistent as I'm sewing from this side of the zipper. And I'm only going to go as far as I can see, which is about right here. There's that lip that I just made, and that hides the zipper. And when you stuff the pillow and sit the pillow on this part, which is the bottom, you don't even know there's a zipper there. So here I have the pillow with the zipper in place on the bottom, and all I have to do is stitch around the remaining 3 sides. And normally you would think that you would want to do that from this side of the fabric, put this part underneath the machine. But because it's not a walking foot, if I did that, this top layer would push and push and push, and I would have extra fabric at the end. So what I'm going to do is turn it over so that the part that has the welt already stitched on, you can see the stitch line here, that's on top. Because that's already stitched into place, that has tightened up this side of the fabric a tiny bit more than the side that doesn't have the welt. So by pinning the layers together with this on top, by the time we get to the end, I won't have any extra fabric pushed and creating any puckers. So it'll come out with a cleaner finish. So I do that corner, then I'll do this corner. And then with those corners pinned, each end is even. And then anything that's in the middle has to be worked in. So what I like to do is pin one corner to the table, and then I can pull on it a little bit, forcing those layers to be the same length, even though one is slightly longer than the other. And then I'm purposefully pinning in this direction, because that way I can sew right up next to them without hitting the heads, and then take them out as I'm sewing. So I'm always pinning in this direction. There, now it's all even. One more side to pin, and then I can sew it. This is the easiest part because now I have all of the layers pinned together. The zipper's in, the welt is in, and I just sew the 3 remaining sides together and turn it around and stuff it with a pillow. Okay, before I take it to the table and turn it around, I'm going to check the corners and make sure I got all the corners tight enough. There's a little bit of stitching I can see there and right there, so I'm going to go over that corner real quick. So I'm gonna make sure that the corners are poked out all the way. That looks really good. How about this one? If you need to trim out some of the fabric at the corner, you can, but I don't unless I really have to. That way it fills in that corner in case the stuffing doesn't reach it. Okay, the stitching is nice and tight. Okay, all four corners look good. I like to press the seams, press the actual fabric. Since I've been working on it, it's got a few wrinkles. Now it looks good. And by the way, here is the corner where we joined the welt, right there. We're gonna stuff the pillow with the insert, and so this is a 27-inch pillow, and we're putting in a 30-inch down insert. You want to fold it in half as best you can. Try to get the whole pillow in there before you let it go. And then get all the corners into position. Once the corners are all tucked in, then close up the zipper. There we have our 2 Euroshams stuffed and ready to ship. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and if you have any other requests for videos. If you want to be notified, there's a bell you can click on that will notify you when there's a new video. Thanks.